Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Compelling Conversations podcast. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Selman. Selman, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you, and I just think it's so interesting the connection we have. You're my cousin's friend's, sorry, my cousin's husband's friend out in Denver, Colorado. How random is that?
Yeah, I know, right? It was like a really like when you reached out to me, I just remember during the wedding we hung out and talked a bunch and then not since. But it's weird, man. You meet people a lot of weird ways and you don't know who's gonna become your friend and how that stuff plays out. So, I'm thankful and I'm glad you reached out, man. I watched a couple of episodes and I think it's always interesting. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I'm very happy to have you. And I had read somewhere that people are destiny in a way. Do you have any experiences with that? People being destiny?
Yeah, man. It's funny you should mention that. Actually, so I got married about 2 years ago, and the way that worked out was who is now my wife, her name's Zoha. We met, or we didn't meet, but I first saw her at my niece's first birthday party, and she made the cake for that. And at the time, I was like, oh, maybe I should go talk to that girl. But fast forward, that was like 2018. Fast forward to like 2019, my mom and her mom become friends and they introduce us and like so it's kind of this weird sort of like long journey, sort of people come into your life with a reason. And so it was kind of like an interesting like, hey, I remember you from this one thing and I didn't say anything, but like, people come back into your lives and it's cool. So a lot of times I do believe that. I do think like when someone comes into your life it's for a reason.
Yeah, and that's so cool that you mentioned that. I'm
How about
curious.
you? Do you have?
Well, I was
Go for it.
curious for you in 2018. Did you actually talk to her at that birthday party?
We talked a little bit after the birthday party. My sister introduced us, and we talked for a little bit, but yeah, and then we didn't. It didn't really like materialize into anything. Um, but I was gonna ask, do you have any experiences like that where you meet someone or like you just feel like this person's in my life for a reason? They've come around for a reason.
Yeah, I think consciously, any person I meet, I kind of get a sense for it.
Yeah,
Um, it's a strange way to put it, but it's like I like to believe in that idea that people are destiny. So everyone I meet, I'm very curious about the role that they play in my life. And
yeah,
so no one specifically is coming to my mind, but it's like everyone I meet, it's like, oh, like I'm curious, where does our journey take us? I had a friend, he
yeah,
said something to me that he said everyone he meets, he feels like he has unfinished business with anytime they
yeah,
part ways. And I kind of feel that way with all the people I meet too. And in a way, this is like unfinished business, eh? We spoke at a
yeah.
wedding and now we're like colliding again after years. And it's like, oh,
Oh yeah.
this is cool. It's like catching up in a way.
Yeah. And like, like to your friend's point, I do think like to a degree we're responsible for adding meaning in our own lives, right? Um like it's the age old question of like what is the meaning of life, right? And like the answer that I think most people give once they give it some thought is just like you have to find the meaning, right? And I think part of that is just looking at like different parts of your life and finding meaning in those things, right? For example, for my work, I do wholesale fly fishing and I don't care about fishing or fly fishing at all, right? But like the way I assign meaning to my work and make those 8 hours I do every day and waking up to take phone calls and like working extra hard, the way I justify that stuff and give it meaning is I look at what has that afforded me in my life and how can I provide for people in my life. And like my dad started that business and what does it mean to him and how does that add meaning to like the minutes I spend working, right? So I think like just inherently believing in adding or purpose gives you purpose, right? Um,
How
at
did
least
you
that's been.
arrive? Yeah, sorry.
Oh, I was just saying that's been my experience with it.
Hmm. I was curious how you arrived at that way of thinking with work.
Yeah, I mean, so just some background. I did my undergrad and then my master's both in accounting, and I worked in mergers and acquisitions for a while. I worked for a healthcare company. We would go in, we would buy smaller healthcare companies. I would gut their accounting department and then integrate it into ours, and then have to fire a bunch of people. And at that point in my life, I was 23, and I was like, I don't find meaning in this work. This is like a soulless job, you know? And so I quit my job without like a real plan. I was like, maybe I'll go back for my PhD, maybe I won't. I just want to find something that like when I go home at the end of the day, I don't feel like I want to feel like I'm adding value, right? Um, and so my dad was like, "Hey, come work for me. You've been in the family business a long time. I'm getting older, and like like obviously I'm sure you feel this way to a degree. As your parents get older, you feel more responsible for them. So I stepped into the family business, and I kind of started feeling the same way for a little bit of like, okay, but like where's the value add of this work, right? And so one day I talked to my dad about it just at work, and I was like, hey, like you did this for 30 years. How did you get up every morning and say like, I'm going to do this thing that objectively isn't that interesting to me and I don't really care about? And his answer was just like, because it provides for every other part of my life, right? And like that is purpose, right? Like being able to put food on the table and give peace of mind to my parents, my family, my wife, and even just like having financial means to support things I believe in, whether that's charity or causes or whatever you lean in towards. So that's kind of like how I just came at that conclusion of like you have to find purpose in what you do, or else it'll always feel purposeless, right?
Yeah. I
And
wanted, yes, good.
oh, I was gonna say like for me, it's hard to like commit to something. Like it's kind of like do you do any kind of like exercise, working out, anything like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like a lot of guys will tell you like I can't do cardio. I can't run on a treadmill for 30 minutes. These same guys will play 2 hours of soccer, right? And the reason for that is because in soccer you have a purpose, right? You're trying to win the
Yeah.
game, so you're running much harder than you would if you're just running on a still track. So I don't know. Some people need it.
Yeah. And that's a very good point that you mentioned there. I thought about a lot of different things as you were speaking. First one was about how there's this hilarious picture of you on graduation day with your mascot. You're like, I'm so done with this.
Yeah,
I always remember that picture. It's just so hilarious. But
yeah.
you mentioned like responsibilities and parents and whatnot. Something I was discussing with my aunt today was, does the vision give birth to responsibilities, or do responsibilities give birth to the vision? Do you have any
Hmm.
thoughts on that?
Um, let's start with what you think on that because that's interesting. I might need a second.
Yeah. I'm, just as curious as the question is, but we were speaking about, Imran Khan and the sort of situation he's in. And
Yeah,
it's like the man has a vision and he has responsibility, but what came first, the chicken or the egg type thing, eh?
yeah,
And I'm not sure. I feel like the vision is sent to you and that demands responsibility. Something like
yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, I think like there is this, if you want to call it a higher power or benevolent like intervention in your life where the specific responsibilities you are given shape your vision, and those two things go like there's a synergy there, right? Like having like in his case having the influence over people is one of his responsibilities, right? And like just the responsibilities in his life as a political leader in XYZ. And the vision is kind of born of this position of power he's been in. And like to a degree, the position of privilege he's been in to see other places where things work more correctly than they do in Pakistan, right? Where the political system is more just. Um, so I think those two things kind of are given hand in hand in a weird way. Right? I don't think you can have vision without that sense of responsibility because you wouldn't have the perspective to appreciate it, right? Like I think in general, responsibility like forces us to grow, um, and like the challenges, like that's what growing up is, right? Like when you're a kid, you don't have any responsibilities, and that's why it's like the easiest part of your life. But it's also like you do the most growing up as those responsibilities start to add on. That's why some people grow up really fast, and that's why some people grow up much slower. It's just
Yeah.
kind of like whatever responsibility you end up taking on, and sometimes it's forced on you, sometimes you take it on yourself. But
Yeah. That's very true. And I really like that word you used, synergy. It seems like the most appropriate word for that. It really
yeah,
is like the two together in a way.
yeah, um,
Another thing that you were talking about that got me thinking was when you're saying working out. For a long time in my life, I had kind of developed this vision where if I can just cross the finish line, then I'm good.
yeah,
I can put my feet up, you know? And working out was definitely one of those things where for like, oh, I'm fit now. Great. I don't have to go to the gym again. I can drink all the
yeah,
Pepsi I want, you know? But
yeah,
one of my friends, he had said something to me where it's like, it's not about finishing a thing or crossing the finish line. It's about continuing the thing. So it's not
yeah,
about getting married, it's about continuing the marriage. It's not about
yeah.
starting a business, it's about staying in the game of the business.
Oh
Have
yeah,
you ever grappled with that of crossing the finish line and feeling like giving up or
yeah. I mean,
what sort of relationship do you have with that?
yeah. I mean, there's like a lot. I mean, going back to like the exercise example. So when I was in high school, I was like, I love playing basketball, right? And I was like 140 pounds and 6'3". So I was like stick skinny, man. And so my goal was always like, I want to put on weight so that I can be a better basketball player. And when I put on the weight, I'll be happy and then I'll stop working out. And like, it became like an obsession for me of like, I want to lift so I can get stronger and so that I can fix this. Like, and growing up, being called skinny isn't exactly flattering. And, so you're like, address this. And for the life of me, I couldn't add weight, right? And actually, one of my friends, he was like, life isn't about end goals. You're not just going to get big because you want to get big. That's not how it works. It's a process, right? And he's like, if you perfect your process, the results will happen, right? If you show up 5, 6 days a week, you work out hard all of those days, you make sure when you go home you eat right every single day, you can forget about getting big. If you do all that stuff, it'll just happen. You don't need to think about it anymore. And I feel like that was like a turning point in fitness for me. Was like it stopped being results oriented and it just became process oriented. And what that let me do was enjoy working out instead of hating it and just wanting to be done with it and wanting to hit the milestone so I could be finished. And so like, I think it's cliche to say, but like the journey matters. The journey almost matters more than the destination. And we hear it all the time, but in different parts of our lives we finally manifest that and understand it. And you develop like an appreciation for like what that means. Because people can tell you, right? Like anyone can tell you anything but like until you embrace it and it becomes like a truth in your life, I think it's hard to actually take in, you know.
Do you ever find yourself being fixated with results again, or are you purely in love with the process?
um I think like there are certain times in my life where being results oriented is just it's hard to work around that, right? Like for example with work, like sometimes it is like need something tangible to turn over at the end of the day or for whatever reason, right? Like but I always find that the results inevitably follow the process. So as much as you can improve your process, your results will be reflective of that, right? Um, but I think it's just a challenge of understanding that like weirdly those two things are intrinsically always going to be tied.
Yeah.
And the part you can control is the process, right?
Yeah. It's like your efforts will never go wasted, huh? It builds
Yeah.
you at the very least.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. You were talking about the journey and the destination, and Brad Pitt, he said one time, he was talking about this. He's like, people ask, is the journey more important or the destination? And he goes, neither. It's the company. And I thought that was just so profound when I heard it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think like inherently in the human experience, like people are what define our experience to us, right? Like I think we try to quantify people as their accomplishments, but like in reality, the people we truly care for are not because of their accomplishments. It's because like that personal interaction.
Yeah.
And I think like especially like with men specifically, we get fixated on this idea of like pushing forward for achievements rather than perfecting relationships, right? And I think culturally, like I'm sure you can relate to this, like especially like in more Eastern like masculine cultures, it tends to be like a real focus of like like I was very blessed that my father was pretty open about his emotions and he was like good at talking to us and stuff like that. A lot of my uncles aren't, right? Like they have a hard time with that, and that's part of their upbringing. Um, and I think like it's on guys like me and you that we can change that culture and we can try to be more understanding and better about putting the time into a relationship, because like your greatest accomplishments are like the people you fostered in your life as you went along, right? And I think like people tend to limit themselves into like this box of like I want to be a really good parent, right? I want to raise really good kids. And it's like that's a great goal, but like it doesn't have to be limited just to kids, right? Like I've had friends in my life who are who I learned from and they are supportive and they help me grow, right? And like that's just as admirable of a goal as like wanting to be a parent, right? Like you should strive to be that to anyone you care for in your life. Be someone
Yeah.
that can like help people when they need it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean like the quote you were saying, it's just it is a community, right? That's and I think like what's hard is we've gotten to a point where community feels so man, I don't know my neighbors, you know? So
Yeah.
community feels really far away. And it's
Yeah.
it's just actively trying to build that again.
Yeah. You know, you're very right. The one neighbor I did know, he was so cool. I included him in my book. He was such a
Yeah.
cool man, but he moved away, and I was like, damn. Anytime I walk past his house, I'm like, he's gone. But it's just
Yeah.
that one neighbor. Everybody else, it's like I don't really care. But like because that guy
Yeah.
made a difference in my life, I'm thinking about him. And that reminds me of
Oh
something
yeah.
I read, which is that at the end of the day, when we're gone, we're just gonna be the memories of a few people. That's
Oh
all we're
yeah.
gonna be. Wild, but it's
Yeah.
true.
So I mean, you love to read. What are some of your like? So I personally, I listen to like audiobooks, maybe like 4 or 5 hours a day between workouts, driving, just when I'm at work. Like I listen to a lot of audiobooks. If you could give me your three books that you would say like, hey, these are ones that will, and it could just be entertaining, right? Like everything you read doesn't have to change your life, but even entertainment has its value, right? What are your three books of like, check these out? Anyone could like these.
I love Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I genuinely believe that's a life-changing book.
Yeah,
Um, The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. It's just
yeah,
so poetic, but so the words are so poignant, you know? They hit you, they puncture you, they're deep.
yeah.
And then I guess an entertaining one would be The Pleasantries of Mullah Nasruddin. He was like a Sufi saint, but he would have
Yeah.
like these funny like encounters happening in his life. So one example would be there's a story where somebody wants to like borrow his donkey and he's like no, and they're like why? He's like because I just said so. You know what I mean? And he had a similar thing about like somebody wanted to borrow his rope. It's like no,
Yeah.
because I just said no, you know? It's just it's very blunt. So I guess those
Yeah.
three. But what about yourself?
Um, and man, off the top of my head, that's kind of tough. But like a book that I love that I think anyone can enjoy, and I think like it's one of yeah, so it's Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton, and I
Oh,
think because everyone's seen the movie, they think they know. Like, oh yeah, I know Jurassic Park. The book is fantastic, man. The book is like it is the best piece of science fiction I've ever read, just in the sense of like it makes everything feel so believable. And it just there's a lot of like interesting like philosophy stuff and like man versus nature sort of like like theming and things like that. But like it's just a page turner. I think like truly like it's a book that like if I was younger I would read in one night because I wouldn't be able to sleep.
wow.
It's one of those. So
I need to check that out, then. I
yeah, and
appreciate you
it's
sharing
fun.
that. Yeah.
There's like this really interesting sort of like monologue one of the characters goes on. He's the guy that's played by what's his name? Uh, I can't even remember, but he's like the mathematician scientist who they bring to the park to like, and basically his whole thing is like chaos theory, and he doesn't think the park's going to work because he thinks it's too chaotic to try and bring these animals that have never existed back into this world that they don't exist in, right? And he has like this monologue about how we look at technology the same way people hundreds of years ago looked at religion as like this is the solution to all our answers and
Mhm.
how that's like an unhealthy way of viewing progress and like it's just like a really compelling criticism of how we've put science on this pedestal, right? um, Even just going back to what we were talking about with like people, right? Scientifically there isn't a quantifiable way to explain our interactions with people and how you make someone feel and like if that's right or wrong to do. But like spiritually we know, and even just within ourselves we understand like when when we need to do better with people and like the value of that, right? And so I just think it's something that I think gets kind of lost is like there are scientific answers but those aren't moral answers, you know.
Yeah.
And
Some things
it's
are
just
just felt.
important
Yeah.
to like grow like just like as a society to like sit down and all of us to be like where do I lie in my morality apart from the study of things, right?
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that. And it's very true, you know? Do you get nervous when you interact with people?
Oh man, I think to a degree everyone does, but I think it depends what situations and why, right?
Yeah.
Like for example, there's different types of nervousness, right? If I'm going to play basketball with a bunch of people I don't know, I have this nervousness of like I need to play well, right? I don't want to look stupid. Or like there's the nervousness of like before a business meeting, it's kind of like I want this to go well or like I remember even on like my wedding day or like meeting my wife's like parents and stuff like that. Like it's nerves or whatever, and like you feel this nervousness because social expectations and like your ability to adapt to them. But for the most part, with people that I'm comfortable with, like I try to just throw myself into that engagement entirely without reservation, and I think that ends up. I think I enjoy myself more that way.
Yeah.
How about you, man? You feel nervous or?
I don't think I do, generally speaking, but sometimes like lately I've been thinking about it. It's like, oh well, I think it just depends on if I'm feeling myself. If I
Yeah.
don't feel myself, then maybe I'll be a little more distant But if I feel myself, then I'm
Yeah.
there type thing.
I was gonna say like I feel like you're a pretty confident guy though, in my
Oh,
experience.
thank you. Thank you. I
You're
appreciate that.
yeah, like
Yeah.
easy to
And I
talk
get the
to.
same from you, by the way.
Oh, I appreciate that, man.
Yeah.
It's like an active effort, right? Like I tried to work on it, but we'll see.
You are so right. It is an active effort. Like, I'm sure you can relate to this as well. There's definitely a part of it that's intrinsic, natural, but there's another part where you have to like continually cultivate.
Yeah, yeah, and like even just like adopting to like new social norms and like even within the same groups, how dynamic. Like I'm in this age group of like a lot of my friends are getting married, and like to a degree that changes social dynamics of like how we talk to each other, or like even how we talk when our spouse is around versus when it's just us, and like like there's a lot of like adapting to like the social relationship evolving at any point in your life, like even with your parents, right? Like you get to that age where like they finally start accepting that you're like an adult, and then that relationship entirely changes because then they're talking to you different and you have to know how to like handle that and like how to treat that appropriately. So it's always like an evolving thing, and I think that's why it becomes like such an active effort, is like just developing an awareness so that you don't damage a relationship that matters.
Yeah. I love how you mentioned that. It's adapting to changing realities, as I heard it once. And I was again talking to my aunt today, and I was like, it's interesting that like after I turned 20, I was like, whoa, now I can talk to like a 50-year-old, like, oh, hey, Bill, what's up? We're like adults
Yeah.
now. But before it was like, oh, Mr. Thomas or something like that. You
Oh
know what I
yeah, yeah.
mean? It's like you could be like so many years older than me, but we're just adults. It's like a casual
Yeah, like
conversation.
once you cross this certain threshold, you kind of enter like this like perceived balance of like, yeah, you're all just kind of the same
Yeah.
passengers on this. Um,
Yeah. And in a way, it's interesting because I think to some extent you begin to trust yourself a little more because you see
yeah.
that everybody around you is kind of like in the same boat in a way. It's like, oh,
Oh
well,
yeah.
now I have to rely on my own instinct. It's a little less of what another person would say.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true, man. So are you
Yeah,
still out in Texas?
I am. And I wanted to ask you, just on this tangent, do you ever get afraid of trusting your own instincts?
Oh, absolutely. Right.
Hmm.
I think that's like I think it's your instincts are shaped by your, at least in my opinion, they're shaped by like the environment you grow up in, right? Like so your instincts are based on a certain set of social cues, specifically probably within the family you grew up within, and then learning that that doesn't apply to everyone and not everyone views these things the same way. It does make you pause and hesitate. And like I think like instincts are good for a lot of things, but I think depending solely on them is a dangerous game.
Yes, that's the way to put it. Yeah. There was a philosopher, a Greek philosopher. I don't remember which one, but like when they would ask him something, he'd be like, "All right, hold on, I have to consult with myself." Then he'd like go
Yeah.
to his corner, and then he'd be speaking to himself, and then he'd come back. And he's like, "Oh, like I found the answer."
Yeah.
It's
But
interesting.
like I
Yeah.
mean like as weird as it sounds, so this is something I think about a lot, and I've been trying to make like a better effort to like limit how much I do this is you know right now we live in like the golden era of consumption, right? Where it's like I wake up in the morning, I take a shower, and then I get in my car and I listen to a podcast in my car on the way to work. And then I get to work and I'll be listening to like a book while I'm working. And then I'll get back in my car and listen to something on the way back. And I'll get to the gym and listen to music. And then I'll watch TV for a couple hours, right? And so your mind's constantly being flooded with information, right? And we consume so much now, right? Like consumption's like entirely how we build our identities in like this era is like, who's your favorite artist, who's your favorite blah blah blah, like the the consumption defines you. So I've been trying to make an active effort of like, I'm gonna turn everything off and I'm gonna sit here for like 5 minutes and just think as hard as I can. Try to think about stuff. And like, like it sounds like a weird exercise, but I think like it's been cathartic in that like you consume so much, it's nice to try and produce some idea, some behavior, like just take a step back from always taking stuff in, right? I think we're all like monkeys that have too much stimulus. And I think like that's a really hard part about like being alive right now. And like, obviously there's other challenges to different times, right? Like I'm not saying this is the hardest time to be a human, but it's definitely a challenge of understanding like how is everything I'm taking in changing how I perceive the world and affecting how I behave, my irritability, my morality, even just like my mental health on like a base level of like, why do I feel cluttered in my mind,
Yeah.
So,
It's very cool that you mentioned that. Well, what has that experiment done for you? Have you realized anything about yourself?
I mean, like, even more than like an introspective sort of like knowledge I'm gaining, it's more so a discipline, right? A discipline to like step away from things and like let my brain kind of do its job, which I think is like important because like right now, like even politically, if you follow sports, right, everyone's just regurgitating the same talking points because we heard it somewhere and we haven't sat down and thought about it. So it's like I heard it from this guy, so I'll just say it now. And I don't really know what that means, but I'm going to say it, right? Um,
Yeah.
so, how about you? Do you do any kind of like meditation? Do you think that's like because that's what I try to think of it as. It's not as focused as I think a real meditation should be, but we're working up to it.
Yeah. I usually take a walk in the park. Today I drove out to a park that was outside of my vicinity. And I just sat there in the
Yeah,
park in the heat for like 20, 25 minutes. And I just
yeah,
thought, and I just kind of looked around me. Um, yeah, I think you make a very good point. Russell Brand was talking about how our screens, our tablets, our laptops, or TVs, they're always like calling forth, or they're often calling forth our weakest, lowliest negative aspects. Like, oh,
yeah,
greed, or laziness, or lust, or
yeah,
gluttony, And it's just
yeah.
like they're poking at the seven deadly sins in us. And I just think that's an interesting take. And
And
I
like
think
just
you're
like
right.
inherently like right now we live in the economy of attention, right? And like everyone's just another person at the screaming match, right? Like when I open my phone, 15 different apps are giving me notifications of like, hey, you need to come check Instagram right now, or like there's a new TikTok you have to see. And it's like, like everything wants your attention. And to a degree, you have to train yourself to understand that like just because they want it, this thing about phones is like we feel like a sense of urgency with phones, but like in reality there very rarely is like an urgency to
Yeah.
check the message you just got.
Could you repeat that part? Just because they want it?
I don't remember what I said. I'm rambling, man.
Oh, you're
um
good. You're good.
no, but it's
Yeah.
I was just kind of talking about the idea that like like all these different parts of life want your attention, right? And like specifically like on your phone, like these apps are designed to try and pull your attention. And just because they're trying to pull your attention doesn't mean like they have any entitlement to it. And you can say no, and it's good to say no, and it's healthy to practice that. Um,
Yes.
Even like just on this phone call, my phone's buzzed like 3 or 4 times, and I'm like, part of me is like, I should check those messages, but in reality, it's like I know where everyone I care about is. It's fine if it's important, they'll call. right? Like
Yeah.
my dad's not going to text me in a medical emergency. He's going to call me, right? So it's kind of like just training your mind to be like, yeah, it buzzed, but that's okay. I'll leave it. I don't need to check it immediately.
Yeah. I really like that you brought this up, man. And it's tough, not only to navigate, but also like sometimes I feel like I'm a part of it, you know? Like a podcast is a platform that I feel like is cool to have cool conversations like this.
Yeah.
But it's also like I want to take my part in what good I can do with it, but I don't want to
Yeah.
take my part in like, you know.
Also, like, I think it has to be said because everyone tries to demonize like phones and social media and all this stuff. It has to be said that like one, there's a plethora of great entertainment, engaging information. Like, dude, frankly, on TikTok, I've seen a lot of things where it's like, wow, I learned something from this 30
Yeah.
second video, you know? And
Yeah.
it's like, we have to appreciate that. Or like even on Instagram, like that's how we keep up with each other's lives, man. Like you reached out to me through Instagram, and like it is like a nice thing of knowing like, hey, like if like even though I don't get to talk to Omar all the time, I can still see like little bits of his life, so I feel like we're still connected, you know? And like I think like even like this podcast, I think it's like I was saying about consumption, it's good that you're looking to produce something, right? Like this is a production of just your ideas and other people you know's ideas, and like it's good to put something out instead of taking everything in all the time. So,
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And it's a very good point. Yeah. It's kind of like I like to think of it in some sense as a responsibility. Like, you know, a role.
yeah,
What can you do with that in a way?
no, and I think it's important to think of it as a responsibility, right?
Yeah. I
I see.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I see we have a little timer here.
We do
Should I
have a
worry
little
about
timer
that?
here.
Okay.
We'll end it in like another session. We'll take a few minutes to end that. But before we close this one, I just wanted to ask you something from the beginning. When you first spoke to your wife after that party, did you at all get the feeling that you'd run into her again or something would happen?
Oh, I had no clue, man. I
Just
hoped, but like
totally like random
so, so frankly, I
encounter, huh?
thought she wasn't that interested, right? Like that was the feeling I got. It was like, yo, she's like not, and like I don't want to force my company on anyone. I don't want to be like the weird guy who keeps messaging and she's not messaging back. So I was like, I'm gonna start pulling away. So I thought like this is over. Yeah, no, I had no clue.
And then it just kind of went in your favor in the end, eh?
Yeah, I know, right? Big win for me.
That's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, man, I did want to say, I had a lot of fun in this conversation. Honestly, I did. And I really liked the things that you were talking about. It was very cool. I didn't expect it, but it's very smooth the way you took the conversation.
oh man, I appreciate that, man. And no, I mean, honestly, thank you for having me. It was kind of weirdly, it kind of ties back into like being able to produce something. It was nice to just sit here and talk to you and like kind of in a weird way just have a deeper conversation with someone for a while.
Yeah.
And if you're ever in Denver, man, let me know. Let's catch up in person next time, right?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Um, I always like to say that, you know, these conversations are like a testament to our time and reality. So it's kind of
Yeah.
reflective of that and it's cool.
Oh yeah.
Um, did you have any closing thoughts? Anything you felt like you wanted to say, you didn't get a chance to? Something on your
Yeah, I
mind
mean,
that you wanted to
I just
express?
think like one, I just wanted to say like I think this podcast is a really good idea. I really appreciate you sitting down and taking the time to make these things happen. I know it can't be easy setting up even just like arranging times with people. I know we had like a when are you free? No, when are you free sort of thing going on. So that's one. I know it's like a huge effort you're making to make this happen, and I really appreciate that. Two, I think, like it's just a good thing to have. Like you were saying, like, it's these things are a reflection of who we are in the time we have here. And I really, taking that step to even just take on that project is huge. And then just kind of the last thing I was going to say is like, I think like we both kind of touched on this, but it's important to just remember that like people matter in your life, and that's what you should focus your energy towards. And that's what I appreciate about this podcast, man. We
Yeah,
we met very briefly, but like the idea of seeking someone out just to talk to them and get to know them is it's a powerful thing that I think sometimes we all forget about. So I appreciate you, buddy. Thank you.
absolutely. Yeah, and thank you for being here. This is so cool, man. You're just 67. So wild, but it's so cool. It's like I'm very glad that
Yeah.
you were able to be another part of this mosaic that is still unraveling. So
Yeah. Oh
appreciate it.
yeah. And hopefully many more, man.
Yeah,
Good seeing you again.
inshallah. Eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good seeing you, my friend. You take care. And until next time.